Let's go.
Let's go.
Oh, did you want to?
Sorry, I'll let you.
Next time.
I'm in love with you.
Snap out of it.
I'll have what she's having.
Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm gonna make them alive. But I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours.
Caustic wit is my religion.
I would make a great queen because I am so stubborn.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where we hate men. We hate men so much. Like, I don't know about anyone else, but recently my hatred of men has just, like, continued to rise. And even last night I told my own father, it's just like, just to let you know, I will probably be angry with you by the end of this movie. I am Lauren Humphreys Brooks. With me, as always, is Karen Peterson. Hello, Karen. How much do you hate men this week?
A whole lot. And it's funny because whenever I say that, then of course there's some really great men who are like, why do you hate me? And I'm like, okay, but not you. You're fine. But also you're not, because you're a man.
Yeah, we agree that as a group they're rather stupid. That's,
exactly.
Like, just like
ignore
send
them
that
individually.
It's like, you're okay, but generally you're terrible.
Yes. There are individuals that I quite enjoy, and as a group I hate them all.
Pretty much. And I feel like this week, these past couple of weeks, to be honest, have not helped that whatsoever.
Oh my gosh. It just feels like it gets worse and worse.
Yeah, I don't know. On the one hand, where it's like, I think we've talked about this so many times, it's just become a mantra almost. We know that this is a good thing on the one hand, because it means that, like, people are actually finally talking about some of the terrible men, and maybe they'll be held accountable. On the other hand, it really is exhausting. And not at all to minimize the trauma that women have undergone, but it is just like constantly just like, oh God, someone else, really? Mm-hmm. Okay, fine.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's like, we want to stop talking about garbage men, not because we just want to pretend this stuff isn't happening, but because we want men to just stop being garbage.
Yeah. And also just to stop, also for all of us really, to stop elevating bad men to really, because there are good men. Pedro Pascal, at least right now, comes into
a wonderful human being. It's going to be so sad if he ever turns out not to be.
Oh God.
Paul Feig is a wonderful human being.
Exactly. So we want to elevate those men and be like, yes, these are good men. We're happy with these men, and then the others we can get rid of.
Exactly. Taika, Junho, you guys can stay.
So this week we've got a couple of different things to talk about. We're primarily going to discuss Mae West, because I'm really excited about that. And
I mean, that's really perfect timing, honestly.
It is perfect timing. But first, let's get the garbage stuff out of the way. Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon, who, as Karen reminded me before we started recording, was probably definitely one of the earliest garbage men that we covered. Way back in 2017, when his ex-wife published a whole discussion about shit that he did and his behavior towards young women, his behavior during their marriage, etc. And now a lot of the stuff that she talked about was pretty terrible, wasn't illegal, but was not good, right? It was definitely, okay, this is really uncomfortable, and definitely it began breaking down this whole concept of Joss Whedon as this great Hollywood feminist, right?
Oh my gosh, Lauren, it was November of 2017, so it was like the same month that the Harvey Weinstein came out, and this was a week before that that 10 long years of trying to make Armie Hammer thing came out too, which is a whole other, like,
it's all coming together. It's all
and
coming
that's
together.
Also, yeah, like November of 2017 was just a banner month.
Oh my God. I didn't realize that
I just looked it up.
Wow. It's been quite a few years.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So most recently, so we kind of knew that, Joss Whedon was not a great person. There'd been a lot of talk about some of his behavior on the set of Justice League. Of course, Ray Fisher, who has talked about the nastiness on Justice League, and just basically that Whedon is an unpleasant person and is unkind, etc. Well, finally, this week, Charisma Carpenter, who appeared on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, came out in support of Ray Fisher, talking about her experiences with Whedon, and it's truly horrifying. I mean, we're going to include a link to the original tweet where she just basically lays out everything. But basically, she talks about Joss has a history of being casually cruel. He created a hostile and toxic work environment since his early career. I know because I experienced it firsthand repeatedly. She talks about him encouraging her to get an abortion when she got pregnant, trying to get her fired, just being basically viciously mean to her. This then kind of prompted a lot of responses from other members of the cast of Buffy, which ranged from specifically saying certain things. Michelle Trachtenberg, talked about how Joss wasn't allowed to be alone in a room with her.
There was an actual rule they had to create on set for that.
Yeah. And she was what, 15 when she was on the
15.
show?
Mm-hmm.
15. People like Sarah Michelle Gellar and who else? God, pretty much everybody who was on that show. Yeah, Sarah Michelle Gellar,
Eliza Dushku was on it for a while.
Claire Kramer, including the men who've come out and talked about the fact that we knew that Joss was not a nice person, that he behaved badly. The Firefly writer Jose Molina refers to Charisma Carpenter's allegations. Casually cruel is the perfect way of describing Joss. He thought being mean was funny. Making female writers cry during a note session was especially hysterical. He actually liked to boast about the time he made one writer cry twice in one meeting. So this is just toxic work environment. This is, it's harassment, it's meanness, it's cruelty, etc. And unfortunately, I'm not terribly surprised, particularly since the stuff from his ex-wife came out, and then also all the stuff with Ray Fisher came out. Plus, just some of the things that, we've seen some of his early drafts of a Wonder Woman script, which is horrifying.
Yeah. And also he abandoned Batgirl because he couldn't come up with a story for her. Isn't that one of the things that happened too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that it's not particularly horrifying, but I think that it's been particularly difficult for a lot of people, as you mentioned before we started recording, that this is someone who for a long time was very much venerated by young women and by girls who grew up with Buffy, etc., for having created these kinds of characters, for having created these really wonderful female characters, these feminist storylines, and kind of being this sort of representation of a good male feminist in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And so for all of this stuff to then come out about him, which is just, it's cruelty. That is what it comes down to. It's cruelty. He obviously delighted in being cruel, and particularly in being cruel to women.
I think that's what is so especially hard to hear and hard to see is this delight in being cruel, and that descriptor of casual cruelty is so, it feels so horrible, because I'm sure we've all known people like that, and it really is just such a terrible environment to be in. And to just think about what that means for those women and what they have had to go through, whether they were on camera talent and having to work through that, or whether they were writers on the show. Buffy, it came out in the late 90s, and it was such an exciting thing because before that, we really hadn't seen kick-ass girls on screen like that. There'd been other great female characters on TV. I'm not saying that she was the first, but it was just different, and it felt like it opened up this entirely new world of of what female characters could be on TV, and like kind of what women were allowed to do. And to hear that this is what was going on behind the scenes, just it honestly, it's like since the stuff came out in 2017, I haven't been able to watch any reruns, and I loved Buffy. I have not been able to watch that show again. I loved Firefly. Haven't watched a single frame of it since we started to find out what he was really like. And not because, I mean, it's that whole thing of like, I don't want to take away from the work that was done by all the amazing, talented people that worked on those shows, but also knowing how much people were suffering while this was being made, it makes it really hard to stomach.
Yeah, and it feels like, okay, is this worth it?
Yeah.
You know, and it is the fact that I know this, you know, in some ways, we've talked about this, in some ways, as a viewer, you're almost like, I really wish I didn't know this. Even though it's good that I know this, I also wish I didn't know this, because it is so difficult to watch. And then because you know all of the background, you know what was going on, you know what was happening to these people while these things were being made. And that's been difficult, not just in terms of someone like Joss Whedon, but in terms of pretty much any kind of art that we like. You know, we've talked about people like Woody Allen and Roman Polanski, and, you know, I mean, every time the Weinstein Company pops up on a film that I'm watching, I'm like, oh God, really?
Right.
No. And that's a producer, that's someone who's not really creatively involved
and I think
the production of the film, but you're still like, creepy.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of why it's different. I think that's part of why I can still stomach watching a Roman Polanski film or even a lot of Woody Allen stuff, is because it's like, it's not just about separating the art from the artist, that whole thing that we've talked about a lot, but it's also the fact that the terrible things that they were, the abusive things that they were doing, is also usually separate from their work anyway. So it's easier to like, to say, okay, I can watch this because what he was doing had nothing to do with this project. But watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer and knowing that Michelle Trachtenberg had to be protected from him, like now knowing that Charisma Carpenter was being basically abused, right? Like as soon as they would cut a scene, then she was probably dealing with some terrible stuff from him. Then it totally changes the way that you experience that work.
Yeah. And I mean, I do have to say, Buffy never really meant much to me. It wasn't something that I watched. I don't know whether I was maybe a little too young for it when it initially came out, or if I just wasn't interested or what. But a show that does mean a lot to me as an adult is The Avengers, and I know about some of the shit that went on behind the scenes. The reason why Diana Rigg decided to leave, the reason why Linda Thorson was basically tortured by some of the producers and directors, and this is in the 1960s, and you're almost kind of like, well, it's not surprising. It's horrifying, but it's not surprising. But at the same time, you're talking about these women who are playing these very strong female characters, and in the best possible sense, I'm using that phrase,
right?
Who are incredibly influential, and they're being basically ignored or berated or sometimes actively treated badly by the men who are directing them. Diana Rigg talked about that her only two friends on set was Patrick Macnee, who was her co-star, and her driver. No one else was friendly to her. No one else was kind to her. Linda Thorson talked about how at one point, because a cameraman positioned the camera in the wrong place and basically got an upskirt shot, she got called into a producer's meeting and yelled at for allowing this to happen, right? Wow. And all of these things are horrifying, considering the fact that you've got these wonderful feminist characters on screen, and on the other hand, you're like, yeah, but they're being abused basically off screen. It's horrible.
Yeah. Well, and so that's the thing. It's like, I wish that he hadn't been so protected for so long, because, and I'm not going to say like, oh, Charisma Carpenter should have spoken out 20 years ago. Things would have been different. Like her reception would have been different. She would have been labeled as difficult, which she was anyway. And that would have been basically the last we saw of her. I don't think that we would have been receptive to what she had to say at the time. And yet you also wonder, like, man, what would it have taken for, I don't know. It's just too bad that this was allowed to thrive, that he was allowed to keep going, and that he gets to make, speaking of the Avengers, he gets to make 2 Avengers movies. One of them is good, one of them is terrible. It's actually the worst film in the entire MCU. And honestly, it's part of the reason it's so terrible is because of how misogynist it is, which was something that I think nobody expected, because it was something we had never seen from Joss Whedon before. And it was shocking. And it was like something changed. It was like suddenly he felt free to really be what he thought, like what he, like, really be his true self. I don't know, it was weird. But yeah, I'm glad that Ray Fisher finally just came forward. And that's the thing. Like, these people can't be stopped until someone is willing and able to come out and start talking about it. And this happens every time. It's like once one person speaks up, then the dam breaks, and then everything starts to come out. And that's what we're seeing here.
And at the same time, I'm still horrified that, you know, Ray Fisher comes out and talks about this stuff and everyone's kind of like, meh.
Yeah.
And then you finally get this kind of tsunami of women coming out and talking about it, you know, pretty much the entire cast of Buffy. And then suddenly and these are primarily white women, right? So, and then suddenly the conversation begins to change. At the same time, you're like, okay, so we're going to have to continuously, so Black people, people of color, and women are going to continuously have to rehearse trauma, right? In order to convince people that this person is actually a bad person, is actually someone who's being abusive and should not be in any positions of power. It's exhausting. I mean, I think that we've been exhausted, I feel, since the Harvey Weinstein stuff.
Yeah.
But you know, it just keeps on building. And the thing is, this isn't the last person we're going to hear about.
Oh no.
You know, maybe it is good that a certain amount of purge is going on.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it's like, I'm glad that we're getting attention, positive attention, on stories like what came out with that conversation between Emerald Fennell and Olivia Wilde recently, where they talked about how they both have a no assholes on set policy. And that goes for everyone on the set, whether they're the star of the film or a driver. Like, nobody's allowed to be a dick. And there's a story that Olivia Wilde tells in that conversation, I think it was Olivia, that someone had early on given her advice to pick a fight every single day and then win that fight, so that it establishes every day that she's in charge. And she was just like, that's stupid. I'm the director. Everyone knows I'm in charge. I don't need to prove that every day. I just need to be that every day. And it's like, yeah, it's so interesting listening to the way that men direct and talk about their processes and talk to the people on their sets versus the way that women handle things, you know. And we've talked a lot about, like, you know, some of the things that male directors do to kind of like shock their actors into the right responses and reactions and things versus what women do. And I remember when I was talking to Jennifer Kent a couple years ago about The Nightingale, and we talked about, you know, she's handling these really traumatic things that, you know, it's about rape, it's about violence. And, you know, we talked about how she made her star feel safe on that set, all of her stars, the men and the women, because that's a difficult thing for men to enact as well, as having to be violent against women on screen. And it's just interesting hearing that, because like, she was really dedicated to making sure that her co-stars felt safe and comfortable around each other. She wanted them to be friends so that this wouldn't be a traumatic event for them. And so this wouldn't be something that they would, you know, have to live with in a bad way. Whereas male directors, they want that animosity because they think that's the only way to get like a really good, authentic, real performance, is if the two actors actually like have this animosity toward each other off away from the camera too. And it's just, I don't know, it's just interesting. It's like, this is why women just need to direct all the movies, get rid of the men, because they had their shot. Let's just let women do it for the next 100 years and see what happens.
Yeah, and it does sound like a lot of female directors, and I'm certain that there are exceptions, but
sure.
But it does sound like that a lot of female directors treat filmmaking as more of a collaborative process. Mm-hmm. That this is a film we are making together, right? And I'm running the set because someone has to run the set, and so I am in control, but also this is something that we are doing as a group of people, right?
Yeah.
And that's a very different attitude to the attitude of a lot of, and we've talked about auteur theory and all of this stuff, this sort of attitude of this masculine form of filmmaking, which is, the director is king, the director is tyrant, whatever else he wants to be. And you do get male directors who don't do that. There's been a lot of talk about the way that David Lynch and Mike Leigh run their sets. Mm-hmm. And it's much more collaborative, much more like, okay, this is something we're doing together. But there's definitely this cadre of belief that the director is in sole control, and just recently, in fact I think yesterday, there was a profile of Shelley Duvall, mm-hmm. and and of course we know the way that she was treated on the set of The Shining. We know that what trauma that created for her.
Yeah.
And you're talking about someone like Kubrick, who is widely regarded as one of the greatest directors of all time. He's widely regarded as a genius. He is, but he was also a horrible person. And one of the things that I don't get is at a certain point you need to take a step back and be like, no art is worth this.
Right.
No art is worth. Yes, I think The Shining is a great film, but I would rather The Shining didn't exist if it had to damage another person so badly, right? Mm-hmm. And you think about that about a lot of these films, just like, this is not worth it. This is a film. This is a piece of art. It might be an important piece of art, but it should not destroy someone's life. And we need to stop treating film or art generally as though it should, right? As though it's somehow brave that, Martin Sheen had a heart attack on the set of Apocalypse Now because he was put under so much stress. It's like, what? This probably permanently damaged him. Mm-hmm. And there's no art that is worth that.
Exactly. Well, and that's the thing. It's like you hear all the time about actors that were almost cast and they didn't. And so then a role went to someone else. And then it's like, okay, that becomes an entirely different movie. It's like, yeah, you can still have that same movie. It's just going to feel very different, and people can all walk away from it having had a good experience and be healthy physically and emotionally and mentally, it's yeah. This makes me just so angry.
Yeah. So before we talk about really happy things and awesome women who are awesome, actually, let's talk about an awesome woman who is pretty awesome, but is being very badly treated and has been very badly treated.
Yeah.
So I believe it was this week that the Britney Spears documentary came out.
I think it was last Friday, yeah.
Last Friday, okay. And so that's been a major topic of conversation over the past week or so. The Britney Spears documentary, Framing Britney Spears, it's a New York Times documentary that premiered on Hulu. It's directed by Samantha Stark, and it basically is an examination of the media's treatment of Britney Spears from the time she became Britney Spears, from the time she was a child, through to today, and especially the conservatorship under which she is currently living, controlled by her father and a number of different handlers. And it's, for me, this film was predictably deeply troubling, partially because I was the right age. I was never a huge fan of Britney Spears, but I remember kind of all of the events that they hit. I was like, oh yeah, I was a kid at that point, and I was a preteen. I was a teenager. I was just graduating from high school. I was just graduating from college. And so I remember all of these things, and I remember how the media framed them, and how, for me at least, there is no doubt that some of that stuff became internalized misogyny for me. Because I remember being like, oh yeah, she's crazy. Oh yeah, she's like a slut or whatever else. And you look back on it, it's just like, look at the way that the media treated her. Look at the way that, you know, anyone, I'm sorry, watching some of that footage, I was just like, anyone would have a mental breakdown as a result of this. Any human being treated like this would at some point crack. Like, you have to. You can't, how can you think that anyone would be able to survive that and come out whole? So it's a fascinating documentary. It made me very, very angry, and very angry about the way the media treated Britney Spears, and the way that we continue to treat not just Britney Spears, but all of these young actresses and performers, both from the 90s and today. I mean, this is not something that's new. This is not something that isn't still happening. It's not like this was in the olden days of the 1990s and the early aughts when, I don't know, people didn't know any better or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your feelings about this, Karen?
Yeah, I watched it last night, and it's interesting because, I mean, I've never really been into celebrity gossip. And so I knew a lot of the stuff that had happened. I knew a lot of the things that people were talking about in Britney's life, but I was not really a big fan of her music. And like you said, and I didn't really pay much attention to the gossip because I was just like, I don't really care about that. I mean, I cared who was getting married to who, you know, and when people were getting divorced. Tom and Nicole, I'll never forget that. But
Oh God, the gossip rags,
the
though,
good old
man.
days. But it's like I just never really paid much attention because I always just thought, okay, a lot of this stuff is either completely not true or completely taken out of context, you know. But where I really felt the punch in the gut, I guess, when I was watching the doc, was thinking about how many times I laughed at some of the jokes. You know, like there's this clip, they show one thing on this doc, but then there was a big longer clip, it was like 4 minutes, that was circulating on Twitter earlier this week, that was Jay Leno talking about Monica Lewinsky. And I do remember that stuff really clearly.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time thinking all that stuff was funny. And it just, I mean, I think it says something about how much I've grown up as a human, but also it just really is horrifying to think about how I was part of the problem too, because I used to be okay with that stuff. I used to think that, you know, making fun of women for their appearance or any reason, and taking entertainment from people's personal lives, I used to find some humor in that and some entertainment, and that's so wrong and so gross. And I think one of the things I was thinking about too, as I was watching, was how interesting it is that because of tabloids, or even now because of social media or whatever, just this way that people feel entitled to access to celebrities. And I mean, one of the things you and I were talking about last night was that one paparazzo photographer guy who was just acting like, well, Britney had always been nice to us, so you know, she never told us to go away. What about when she told you to go away? Oh, well.
Like, well, yeah, and I do think that there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on. That there's a lot of people who he's ignoring some. I think at some level he knows that what he was doing was wrong, but it was what he did. That's how he made his money. Yeah, and he talked himself into a space where he was like, this is okay. You're just like, well, she told you to go away. Yeah, but she told us to go away for like the day. Yeah. And you're just like, did you not process, you know? So I remember that whole incident when she, you know, she shaved her head and then she hit the paparazzo's car with an umbrella, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember that happening. Everyone being like, Britney's insane. And, you know, and I didn't even question. I would have been a teenager, possibly in college by that point. I think it was like 2008. I was like, oh, Britney's crazy, she's a psychopath, you know, all this stuff, and everyone was talking about it. What I didn't know, and what I never paid attention to, was the actual lead up to that. Well, you know, she was being followed around. She had been refused access to her children. She was upset. She was with a friend, like one other friend. She's upset. She's going through a lot of emotional turmoil and mental turmoil. And meanwhile, you've got these photographers who are chasing her, trying to take pictures of her and being like, oh, babe, you okay? It's just like, no, she's not okay. Leave her alone.
Right. And they're so concerned and just wanting to ask her if she's okay that they're taking a bunch of pictures of her when she's clearly having a really bad night. You know, it's just, it's so gross. And it's like, I didn't watch the Ann Curry interview or the, what's her face? Diane Sawyer. I didn't watch those interviews because I wasn't that interested in Britney, but I do remember a primetime interview with her and Kevin. And it was like not long before they split up, and they were living in this house that was basically like a fortress because they just were trying to shut out the paparazzi. And I don't remember if they even had either of the kids yet. They probably did. But I do remember that interview, and I felt so sad for her. Everyone else is like, man, she's really turned into such a mess, and oh, she's white trash, and what, can't take Louisiana out of the girl or whatever. And I just remember being so disgusted by that. And I'm not trying to say I'm like more enlightened than anybody else, but I just remember thinking like there's this girl is sad. Like her life has been really, really hard. And I felt bad for her. And I think that's part of why I never really paid much attention to the like tabloid stuff, because it was like, that's just like, let her live her life. She's an entertainer and that's it. And I don't know, it's kind of funny because this whole thing with her conservatorship, which that was the interesting thing. I didn't know much about how those work. And I didn't realize that once you're in one, you like don't get out of it ever. I thought they were supposed to be like more or less temporary. So that was an interesting piece of information. But it was like, it's cool that there are fans that are supporting her. And after what happened this week with one of the judges, it seems like, wow, maybe this is actually going to help her out. But there's even still a sense, in a very different way, of people feeling like they have some sort of entitlement, some sort of right to access to her with like that podcast that those two girls started that's just all about her Instagram. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, fan stuff, whatever. But then it was like, as soon as she disappeared, they just made it their mission to like track her down and find out what was going on. And it's like, it's been 10 days. We haven't heard from her. It's like, what? Why are you so obsessed? Like, leave her alone.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. For once, I'm like, oh my God, I agree with Michael Moore. There's a brief clip where he says, well, maybe we should just leave her alone.
Yeah.
I was just like, thank you. Someone was like, maybe we're the problem. Huh?
Yeah, I know. I felt the same way. I was like, ooh, I agree with Michael Moore. Gross.
But yeah, it is this like there's a narrative. I think at some level there's a narrative that's going on, and in some ways this documentary is a part of that narrative, and the fact that we're talking about it right now is a part of that narrative, where she was this girl next door, she was this big star, then she had all of these issues, now she's like in a situation where she's practically a prisoner, and then I do think that there's a good chance that at some point she will know that will no longer be her position, right? And at each point, she has become a part of someone else's narrative. She's become a part of a public narrative that doesn't really acknowledge the fact that she's a human being who probably has problems, probably does need help, and has been in the spotlight since she was a kid. Yeah. Right. So she was a kid. I mean, her first appearance was on Star Search or whatever it is, where she's a 10-year-old girl being asked about whether or not she has a boyfriend, and I really just want to be like, what, I wish she'd been like, actually I'm gay. Like I really wanted to hear that or something.
Oh man. Well, and not only that, but like the follow-up question when she's just like, no, boys are mean. And I mean, I loved Ed McMahon. He always seemed like a sweet guy, but he was just like, well, what about me? I'm like, ew, gross.
Yeah, you're like an old man. You're talking to a 10-year-old. You know,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. And at each point, you know, you see those interviews where they're talking about her virginity or her breasts or anything. And I was like, first of all, it's really inappropriate to say this to like an 18-year-old girl. Second of all, it's really inappropriate to say it to any woman.
Yep.
Like, I'm sorry if you and it did remind me of all of these things that we've treated as acceptable, right? The commentary on actresses' bodies, the commentary on musicians' bodies, this like obsession with we're gonna catch them. Oh my God, she's wearing sweatpants. Doesn't she look like a pig? It's insane.
Yeah.
And this sense that not just tabloids have a right to these people's bodies, but that we as the public do, that individual interviewers do, that, you know, some man has a right to comment on an actress's or a musician's breasts because I don't know, she's got breasts. Like, of course she has breasts. She's a woman. Like, what is even happening?
Yeah.
And why would you think that was appropriate at any point to talk about? Like, to even have a conversation about? Like, well, there are boobs.
Yeah. And that's where in this framing Britney Spears, that's where it really felt like I was getting a mirror shown to myself, because that's where I've definitely in the past, I feel like I'm a lot better about it now, but that's definitely where I was wrong in so much of, you know, when I was younger, it was constantly being okay with criticizing women's looks. While I am not exactly beautiful myself, you know, I'm very normal looking, but there's nothing special about me. And I'm sitting here criticizing like, oh, her nose is kind of big, or, oh, like, why would she do her hair like that? You know, or
it's very, I think there's a lot of internalized misogyny, and it is
yeah.
misogyny, you know.
Yep.
And we have this tendency to immediately be like, oh, doesn't she look awful? It's just like, well, of course
Mm-hmm.
you know, of course she looks awful. She like just got up and went out for coffee. Like,
Yeah.
she's got 2 small children. Who looks great when they do that? You're not fucking camera ready when you go and
she doesn't owe that to us. She doesn't have to fix herself up for us to be able to say like, oh, she looks great all the time. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. And it, you know, and I think that the depressing part about all this is that, of course, this is still going on, and we've talked about the areas of the media where this is still going on. Luckily, women are beginning to push back against it more. Actresses have been talking about it more, and there's definitely, the culture has definitely shifted since the 90s and the early aughts. Yeah. But it's still there, and yeah, at the end of the day, Britney Spears doesn't owe us anything. I just, at this point, I'm just like, I really hope that she's okay. Like, that she finds a way to be okay.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was one of the things that was an interesting point in this was, you know, especially, I mean, it had been building for years, but especially in the 90s and the early aughts, it really had become, the tabloids were controlling everything. And by that point, it wasn't just magazines in the supermarket. It was, you know, the tabloid shows, you know, E! News and TMZ and all these TV shows that were gossip rags on screen, that really did basically tell us what to think about these celebrities and really formed these images of them. And now people, I know that stuff still exists, but it's just different now, and it seems like it's not as prevalent. And the point that they made that really made sense was like, now people are curating their own images because they have their social media, you know, like they can be whoever they want, just like we all can, through Instagram and through Twitter and stuff. And so it really has changed the way that paparazzi work, and it's changed the way that tabloids work. For better or worse.
And there's a lot more, again, for better or for worse, direct public access to celebrities. So, you know, we can have a conversation about Carey Mulligan's an interview with Carey Mulligan, right? Or about Britney Spears or anyone else. And there's a much more of this direct access where it's no longer a group of magazines or a group of television shows controlling the narrative. It is a whole lot of people controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
And that can be good and that can be bad, but it has definitely changed. And it's changed the way that we approach celebrity, certainly.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's move on to talk about something more fun.
Woohoo!
A woman who was very much in control of her own image, who in fact probably lost her career at the end of all of it because she was so in control of her own image and the things that she said and the things that she did on screen. I really wanted to talk at some point about Mae West, who is one of my favorite screen icons. She is, there is no one who is quite like her. She really is her own thing. I've loved her for years. I mean, I remember hunting down a copy of the film She'd Done Him Wrong, and partially because I was in love with Cary Grant at the time, and then I actually got to see Mae West and was like, oh my god, she's amazing.
At the time, you say it like you don't love him anymore.
I still love him. I still absolutely love him, just not as intensely as I did when I was a teenager.
All right, that's fair.
So West had a really fascinating Hollywood career. At the height of her career, she was close to 40. She signed a contract with Paramount Pictures in 1932, and she basically became this massive star. She became one of the most popular stars that Paramount had. And she fell into, kind of rightly, that period in Hollywood history between the sort of dominance of sound and the advent of the code. She fell into a really interesting period in Hollywood history that we've talked about before, as this very sexually explicit, risque, double entendre woman who was very much in control of her own image. And in what she wore, in what she said, in how she was photographed, in the way that she related to men on screen, in the way that she related to other women on screen. And a lot of this all begins with her stage career. She had a very long stage career prior to joining the films. She famously, her play Sex was rated. And she was arrested, and a number of other people were arrested for obscenity. So this
and she went to jail for 10 days.
She went to prison. And
but she got out 2 days early, I think, because the warden had a liking for her. That's how I was reading the story. He was whining and dining her and let her out 2 days early.
And she was very she was very much, if you watch her on screen, she's very much this woman who enjoys her sexuality, who enjoys being sexual. She enjoys men. Mm-hmm. But she enjoys men. One of the things I've always liked about her is that she enjoys men on her terms. It's never on their terms. It's always like, this is what I want. This is who I want to sleep with. This is who I want to be involved with. Even at most of her films, she winds up getting married at the end of the film. But even then, it's like, this is going to be on the terms that I set. Yep. And with the person that I will marry, not the terms that he sets, not the terms that society sets, etc. I'm going to be in control of my money, in control of my body, in control of my sexuality, in control of who I want, when I want them, and whether or not I'm going to want them tomorrow. And it's really admirable and very unusual in a lot of ways to see someone like Mae West on screen, because we don't expect her. We expect her to be almost too extreme. And she does push the envelope, definitely. She pushes the envelope about what femininity even looks like. She's always, whenever she's on screen, she's always wearing these incredibly tight dresses, these, incredible hairstyles or hats or, headpieces. She's always dripping with jewels. Yep. Very much like represents herself as her on-screen persona is very much like, she's very acquisitive. She wants money. She wants jewels. She wants men. And she's got a lot of power, basically, and kind of plays the game based upon her own rules and on the things that she wants. So I just wanted to kind of talk about who she was. Karen, is this the first time you were watching Mae West films?
I'm so embarrassed to admit that yes, it is. I've known about her forever, and I've seen people imitate and channel her for years, and I think I've even seen a couple of interviews with her, but like videos of them. But yeah, I had never seen a Mae West film before, and I'm so embarrassed that I hadn't, because she's just one of those people that like, I mean, she is an icon, and the what she did for feminism, what she did for LGBTQ rights, I mean, or at least acceptance, you know, it just, she's such an amazing person on screen and off screen. And the fact that she, at, you know, in the 30s, we have all the, we've talked about this a lot, but we have all these views of what the 1930s were like in the 40s, and you know, what was considered proper at the time, because that's what the Hays Code and that's what the censors wanted to curate, was this, you know, women were prim and proper, and Mae West is very much not that. And she was allowed to be who she was because she just refused to be told she couldn't. And I think that there's just something so wonderful and refreshing about that. And it part of it too makes me wonder how different the landscape would have been, and how quickly, if more women had followed her and had just said, yeah, you know what, we're just gonna be who we are, and to hell with the rest of them, instead of letting men not, I don't know, I mean, men had a lot of power, and that is very difficult to navigate, and a lot of people are not equipped to go up against that, but Mae West was. And not only did she star in her films, she wrote them too. She decided what her dialogue was going to be, and she, again, to talk about curating images, she curated her own image and didn't let other people tell the world who she was.
Yeah, and I think, talking about curating of images, I think that it's interesting to consider the image that she did curate, because it is almost this burlesque of femininity, that there's an extremity to it.
Yeah, she's like,
right?
Aggressively feminist.
Yeah,
aggressively sexual. Yeah.
Yeah, she's very like, I actually, as I'm talking, I keep on making these gestures of like big, but there is this like bigness to her, you know. She's extreme. She the way that she talks, the way that she walks, the clothes that she wears, the jewelry that she wears, it's almost edging into, you know, this sort of and this is where I think she gets really interesting. She based initially in her stage persona, she based her stage persona and her walk off of what were then referred to as female impersonators. So drag queens, men who dressed and acted as women in burlesque shows or on vaudeville, and were performing, you know, these kind of, again, that extremity of femininity. And it's interesting then, because you've got this persona who's based on this extreme femininity that we associate with drag queens, or at the time with female impersonators, being played by a woman, right? So this woman kind of embodying this extreme femaleness as part of her persona, and like we say, as part of her feminism, as part of the way that she expresses her sexuality. She is almost getting away with it because she's being so extreme. So, you know, when she makes all of these jokes about men, and, you know, all kinds of things about, like, you know, I'm 6'6". Oh, well, let's talk about the 6 inches.
Yeah. Well, and you say she almost gets away with it because she's so extreme. I think that's exactly why she gets away with it, because she pushes in such a way that it's attractive, and people like it, and they want to see that. They want to see more of that. And so she gets away with it because I think if it was toned down a little bit, it wouldn't have been as attractive to people, because I don't know, just when you really push boundaries, that can be very exciting, because there is that, like, that element of naughtiness, or you know, things that are taboo and not allowed. It's like, well, yeah, then you want more of that.
Yeah, and the humor, and particularly the humor in that period, if you look at a lot of the comedians who were major screen stars in that period, a lot of the humor is based in extremity, and it is based in vaudeville, ultimately. But you know, if you look at the Marx Brothers are extreme caricatures of a whole bunch of different things. But they get away with some of the things that they do and some of the things that they say because it's just like, oh, well, this is just supposed to be funny. And I think that Mae West kind of falls into that category to a certain degree, at least. She can say some of the things that she says and behave in a certain way because you're like, well, it's a joke. But it's also not a joke. And I like the fact that she really does walk that line in most of her films, certainly in her pre-code films. That she's always walking that line between not quite being obscene, like she never completely crosses over to saying what she's actually saying, but it is so close. You're just like, holy shit, how did she get away with it? You know? And just the way, one of the things I noticed in rewatching some of these films that are on the Criterion Channel, just the way that she looks at men. Like when Cary Grant walks on screen, and honestly, I think that she is all of us at that moment. We're just like, oh wow, like, you know, she just looks him up and she eats him up. You know, she's just like, oh yes, please, like, oh boy, and she does that constantly. In all of her films, she's checking out men's asses. She's looking them up and down. She's looking at their crotches. She's like feeling their arms. You know, all of that, and it's appreciative, but it's also like, oh yeah, I want to have sex with you, and also I probably won't call you in the morning.
Yeah. she's so great. Well, and just watching the films that I did watch this week, I kept thinking about, I was 10 and I was obsessed with Golden Girls, and I just kept thinking like, wow, Blanche Devereaux really does channel some of this attitude of Mae West, and I never really realized that before, but it's just like, man, it's so fun. Like it's that whole like, I'm just gonna be who I want, and men are, you know, if men can consume women, like why can't women do it the same? And yeah, it's so fun to watch her, and it really does make me think, man, if she were making movies today.
Well, okay, so this is a good segue. So we did get a question from Owen Daly, and what he asks is, are you guys fans of Drag Race, and have you seen the when Mae West was impersonated by one of the queens of the show? More serious question: do you see West could have been a major star during modern times? I did want to say something about Drag Race because, as I said, she began her career basically not only being a major supporter of gay rights, particularly the rights of gay men. She also began her career working with drag queens, right? And so I like the fact that she is one of the gay icons, gay male icons.
Yep.
And yes, I have seen Drag Race. I dig Drag Race, and I remember seeing one year, it was a couple years ago, someone did Mae West, and I was just like, oh my god, I love this is great. Like, he was a great Mae West, and I think that she would have been incredibly appreciative of that too.
Oh, she would have loved that so much. Those clips are hilarious. You should watch it. It's just on YouTube. You could just Google Mae West Drag Race, and yeah, so much fun, and she would have absolutely loved it. And yeah, I do think if she were alive today, she would be just as major of a star. It'd be interesting to see what kind of work she would do and what she would be known for. But yeah, I definitely think that she would have found a way. If she wanted to, she would have found a way to break into Hollywood, and she would just be just as amazing now.
Well, and this is one of the interesting things. So I was thinking about, you know, well, would she have made it as a star? And I think it would have been very different, obviously. Yeah. And in some ways, you know, in terms of the kind of sex jokes that we can make now in film, she's very tame. But
she would be modern. Like, that's the thing.
She would be.
She would adapt to the times.
And that control of her own image, I think, is one of the things that makes her, even in her you know, films in the 1930s, that makes her very modern. It was interesting because several weeks ago I had a conversation with some friends about WAP and whether or not it was feminist, and that happened to coincide with me watching a whole bunch of Mae West films, so that's the background to this. But I was actually thinking about it. It's like, yeah, but it is burlesque, right? This is burlesque. This is extremity. But you're also talking about women taking charge of imagery that is imposed upon them by men. And rather than sort of, saying like, well, I'm going to do the exact opposite, they're like, well, I'm going to take this and I'm going to take it to an extreme. And I am going to have control over how I express my sexuality and how I dress, what I do with my body, what I do with my voice, etc. And so, in that sense, I think that there's definitely a continuum between someone like Mae West and WAP and some of the more recent kind of performances of femininity. I think it's very important that we recognize that she is still very influential, and she was very influential in the period, even though the code did definitely essentially destroyed her career by the end of it, because she couldn't get away with saying the things that she wanted to say. Yeah. They kind of basically, she tried, and there are some of her post-code films that are still very good, but they definitely lose strength because you can tell that she's trying to say something, or trying to do something that she can't do. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think I said a while ago that men were so terrified of Mae West that they made up an entire code of censorship just to stop her.
Yeah. It's funny because it's like, it does feel like pieces of the code were much more directed at her than they were directed at the work of like gangster films and the stuff that Frances Marion was writing. And it does feel, it feels like they really just wanted women to be quiet and sweet and not
women
Mae
can't
West.
say those things.
Exactly.
Women can't talk about men like that.
Women don't think like that. Oh yes, we fucking do.
We did get another question, which I think I don't know tons about Mae West's stage career, but so the question is from, sorry, I almost lost it. Is from at Mae West Side, and they ask, why does the myth persist that a 3-hour play Diamond Lil was filmed as She Done Him Wrong, when only a few minutes of the play was shoehorned in? I think the reason why this exists is because of the title of the name of the character, and also Wikipedia. Yeah, that's why. That's why. Exactly. So yeah, it's a 3-hour play, and actually I haven't read Diamond Lil, but I've read a number of Mae West plays. They are explicit. They are far more explicit than her films. And they're dealing with things not just about sexuality, but about prostitution, about abortion, about violence against women, things like that. And they're really interesting to read, actually. But most, if any parts of those plays made it onto the screen, they were very much defanged. Yeah. They would have had to be, even though, like, She Done Him Wrong was 1933, so it was really before the code fully was being implemented. But even still, there were limits to what theaters would have allowed to show. So I mean, there was censorship before the code. It just wasn't the same kind of censorship. There was a lot more that was allowed. Yeah, it wasn't codified. Yeah, so exactly. It was just kind of like, well, I'm offended by this, so I'm not going to show it. Whereas it became, this is against the rules and you can't do it. So very different things. So before we close out this conversation, I wanted to ask you, of the films that you saw, which was there one that was your favorite, or was there like a particular scene that you're just like, oh my God, I love this? Oh man. Well, every time she was flirting with Cary Grant was great. I mean, how do you not love that? So I saw them in She Done Him Wrong and I'm No Angel. And yeah, those are both just so fun. But I think for me, and maybe it's just because it's the one that I watched last, the Go Into Town
where she's supposed to marry this guy and then he dies, so she's out of having to marry him, but she gets all his money. It's like, wow, this is great. And it's just such a fun movie, because then it ends up being like this kind of caper. There's she gets kind of inserted into this very manly world of like horse racing, gambling and stuff, and it's just such a fun movie, and I just man, I love it. I love her. I'm trying to think. There's like it's early. I'm pretty sure it was that one. I watched 4 of them right in a row, so now maybe I'm getting some things confused. But I think it was when she and her fiance decided to get married, and she's putting off the wedding for as long as possible. And he's just like, that's 10 weeks away. And she's just like, yeah, I know. Be glad, at least I'm saying yes, basically. And it's just like, oh my gosh, she's me. She's who I want to be when I grow up.
I think that we should all aspire to at least have a little bit of Mae West in our lives. One of my favorite scenes is still the courtroom scene at the end of I'm No Angel.
Yes.
Where because it's so clever, and I like the fact that she's basically facing all of the men that she's had affairs with. What I really like is that, and I can't remember the line exactly, but there's a line that she says just like, well, are you sorry that you gave me those presents? No.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want them back? Are you asking for them back? No. Just like, well, then what are you complaining about? And there is this sense of like, talk about her acquisitiveness, and almost all of her films, she's always looking for money, right? She's looking for a man with money.
Mm-hmm.
She's looking for good sex and a man with money, preferably in the same package. But one of the things I like about that is that it addresses very much head on of just like, she's being blamed for, taking presents from men. And she's just like, if they want to give me presents, I'm not going to argue with them about it. Like, I'm not stealing from them. I'm not doing anything wrong. If they give me something and then I'm like, great, bye. Like, that's my right. And I really love that. I love that whole sequence where she's just like, yeah, that's right. That's right. I slept with all of those guys. It was great.
And
it was great. They gave me a whole bunch of diamonds and money. It was even better. What do you want from me?
Well, and I love the way Cary Grant's just watching her, and he's watching all this unfold, and he's just kind of like, but I love her. And one of the things that's so fun about the two of them is how much younger he is than her.
Yeah.
And it's like, it just makes it even hotter, I think. It's like this younger man who's totally in love with her and obsessed with her.
Well, and I think that it's notable, she starts her career in Hollywood in 1932. She was nearly 40 years old. That's really unusual.
Yeah.
For a woman in that period to be on quotation marks the wrong side of 30.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, it's unusual now, so
it is very much so. And to also launch a career where her whole persona is playing these incredibly sexual roles. And she's seducing men like Cary Grant or Randolph Scott,
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. But yeah, they are visibly younger than her. Like, this is baby Cary Grant. This is a very young Cary Grant.
I think this is like his 4th movie. She done him wrong. Yeah.
And so again, it's that kind of embracing of female sexuality at any age. And you know what? She did a lot of different things as she got older. She did radio, she did stage. Most famously, she was in Myra Breckinridge very late in her career and everything. But she always had that kind of embrace of her sexuality and who she was, regardless of her age. And I really love that about her.
Yes, we should all be like Mae West.
So that is everyone's assignment, male or female, not binary, non-binary, transgender, etc. Go out and be more like Mae West. Like, I think we should all do that.
Yes. And if you can't be Mae West, be Cary Grant.
That's another option.
It's not a lot to ask. Come on.
So I think that is going to close us out, unless there's anything else you wanted to talk about, Karen.
Well, I just wanted to mention on the subject of Mae West and Cary Grant that I really love the fact that we have him because she pushed for him. Like
Yeah.
he became a star really because she decided that she wanted him to be a star. And I love that so much. And and she really was so supportive of so many people in her career, and it's just so great. I was reading this story about shoot, now I gotta look up the name because I don't want to get this wrong. But it was sorry, hold on. Talk amongst yourself. I'm just kidding. I just don't want to get this wrong. And because it was one of her co-stars in, I think, yes. Okay. So it was in I'm No Angel. It was the woman who played Beulah, Gertrude Howard. And Beulah is her maid, her personal assistant person, this Black woman who, of course, there's definitely, a lot of stereotype to the character. But I was reading this story. Gertrude Howard died at age 41. And it was Mae West who raised the money for her to have a proper funeral. And wow. I just thought that was so touching. And this was, she didn't do a lot of movies, but she did several. And this was, I think, the only movie that the two of them did together. But it was something that really, I loved that. I thought it was so cool. And then it kind of took me down this rabbit hole of just learning more about Mae West and how supportive she just was of other people that she worked with. And I just think, man, not only was she really in charge of who she was, but she was also very supportive of other people and really encouraging of other people. And I think that's awesome.
I think that that's good to know. And one of the things, actually, in just you mentioning that, I was going to close this out, but I did want to say this, is one of the things that I like about her is that there is very rarely in her films a sense that she is a enemy to other women.
Yeah.
There are definitely women that she doesn't like and that don't like her, but usually her attitude is, that she wants to support other women. She very often is protecting particularly younger women who maybe don't completely know what they're doing. That's a major theme in She Done Him Wrong, and it's an interesting theme also. But there is the sense that she's just like, I don't want to encroach upon other women, but I also will not be bullied. I will not be, women, if women want to call me names, I'm not going to allow them to do that, right? That's not going to be something that I will accept. And I like that balance. Like you say, there are definitely issues of racism in her films. And I think that, I would be very interested to know if any Black film critics had really talked about her in this way, because there's a lot of tension. There's, on the one hand, a lot of identification of her and her role with the Black community in her films, but at the same time, there is definitely this divide. And there's, on the one hand, in something like She Done Him Wrong, or I'm No Angel, there's this camaraderie that is there between her and her Black maids, but at the same time, they're her maids, right? Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting dynamic, and it's not as cut and dry maybe as it could have been, and it's definitely problematic. But I would be really interested to actually read more about that.
Yeah, I would too. Definitely something to research.
Yes. So I think that is going to close us out. Thank you all so much for listening to this very whiplashy sort of episode.
There are 8 Mae West films on the Criterion Channel right now. There's a collection, The Best of Mae West, and go watch it.
Go watch them, yes. All of them are worth it, definitely. Like, if you have not seen She Done Him Wrong and I'm No Angel and Belle of the 90s, definitely watch those. Like, yes. Just make it your mission. They're not terribly long either, so,
Yeah, I think the longest one was like an hour and 26 minutes.
Yeah.
Most of them are like an hour and 5, an hour and 10, so, yeah.
So So, and as always, we want to thank our patrons who are being so lovely and kind and supporting us. We do have a new patron. Who's our new patron?
Robert. We have 2 Roberts now.
Oh, we have 2 Roberts. I was like, oh my God, is there a new patron? So we want to thank very much Adriana, Ali, Heather, James, Kathleen, Carriata, Mason, Matt, Matthew, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Nicole, Robert, Sharon, Natao, and Will. I think that Sharon and Steve are still on there as well.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So thank you so much. And as always, you know, we've definitely been rearranging our patronage. That's changed a little bit. So if you are a patron and you haven't checked on that, please go and look at that, just to be certain that you're on the tier that you want to be on. And anyone who's not a patron, please, we welcome you. We would love this. We were so grateful for the people that patronize us. Our
the only way we'll allow it.
It's true. Our Patreon is patreon.com/citizendame. And if you just want to send us a couple of dollars, you don't want to make a commitment, that is fine as well. We have a Ko-Fi account. That's ko-fi.com/citizendame. You can buy some of our merch from our Zazzle store. That's zazzle.com/citizendamepod. We have masks on there. Wear your fucking masks. And of course, you can get in touch with us a multitude of ways. We are on Twitter and Instagram at CitizenDamePod. Our email is citizendamepod@gmail.com. And we have our website, citizendamepod.com, where we have reviews up. And I'm going to have some more reviews up because I'm finally getting out from underneath a mountain of work.
Yay!
Karen, I know, is going to have some more reviews up. So yeah, keep an eye on that. We are doing our best. That is citizendamepod.com. And of course, you can get in touch with us individually. I am on Twitter and Instagram at LHBusiness. Karen, where are you?
I am on Twitter and Instagram at Karen M. Peterson.
And that will close this out for this week. We will talk to y'all later.
Bye.
Well, when I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better. What's the good of resisting temptation? There'll always be more.
Well, I wish you'd forget your principles, Ruby. I must have you. Your golden hair, your fascinating eyes, and alluring smile, and lovely arms, your form divine.
Wait a minute. Is this a proposal or you taking inventory?
You certainly know the way to a man's heart.
Funny, too, because I don't know how to cook.